The whole world has been doomed. In order to guard the continent, the 10 strongest knights depleted all of their life force and mana. Now only death lingers above the vast stretches of the land. Some warriors are laying unconscious on the ground. All of a sudden, a foot stomps on the warriors, tearing them to pieces. A human warrior moves forward, dragging a hammer along with him. The foot belonged to the demon commander Gluttony, who mocks the main character for his name, Tiny. Gluttony admits that Tiny is quite strong, but he cannot take the life of Gluttony with his strength. Tiny lifts up his hammer, and it starts glowing red. He jumps up with all of his strength, and he uses lightning wallop on Gluttony, but he blocks it with his hand. Tiny keeps on pressing his hammer against Gluttony's hands, and Gluttony tells him to give up because all of his efforts are futile. Tiny tells Gluttony to shut his damn mouth. Tiny uses meteor objurgation skill to tear Gluttony apart. Tiny lands on the ground, and he is happy to finally have some peace. His happiness is short-lived as he realizes there is a hole in his stomach. Tiny tries to patch it up using magic, but he seems to be out of mana. Tiny knows that he is not going to live through this, and he starts remembering the choices he made in his childhood. He starts doubting everything he did since his childhood. Mana training was the exclusive knowledge of distinguished knights and nobility. Therefore, he had to overcome countless failures as he advanced slower than others. He always believed that he can advance to the top with his efforts alone, but as he grew up, he realized his efforts were all worthless. If only he had trained with proper methods from early on, he could have saved the entire continent. Soon, the mana of Tiny runs out and his wound starts bleeding. He barely managed to defeat the demon commander Gluttony, who was only the 7th out of all the demon commanders. Tiny cannot even fathom the prowess of other commanders and the demon king. All of a sudden, someone calls Tiny's name and he looks back. This voice belonged to Sword Emperor, who is barely hanging on to his life as well. Sword Emperor informs him that he's going to die soon, but before he dies, there is something he wants to ask from Tiny. Sword Emperor asks him why he didn't run away from the battle, and Tiny asks him what he's talking about. Sword Emperor once heard that Tiny was a child from the slums, and things must be pretty hard for him. Tiny replies by saying that he cannot run away because he's a man and it's his duty to protect anyone he could. Sword Emperor starts laughing loudly after hearing it, and Tiny asks him how he has still the strength to laugh. Sword Emperor says that he will trust his talent, which made him one of the 10 strongest knights with pride alone. Sword Emperor tells Tiny to find him when he returns. Tiny is still confused as to what Sword Emperor is saying, but Sword Emperor ignores his question and tells him that if he pays a reckless visit to him in the past, he will not believe him, and that's why he will now tell Tiny one of his secrets. Sword Emperor points toward his ring and informs him that his daughter's name was Lila, and it came from the name of the flower his wife and he liked. A lot of mana start merging toward Tiny. Sword Emperor keeps on telling him that in truth, he didn't like that flower very much. Sword Emperor instructs him to never forget anything he just told him. Sword Emperor tells Tiny to find him as soon as possible. After that, Tiny's consciousness starts fading away and he thinks he's dying. After, he wakes up and he finds himself in his childhood body, and he thinks of it as a dream. He didn't want to go through his childhood memories again. He had a shitty past where his sister was killed because of him. He had stolen a ring, but his sister got beaten up when she tried to protect him, and she died while taking care of him. Soon, 2 goons barge into the room, and they are here to teach his sister another lesson for stealing the ring. They kick Tiny's sister chair and she drops down to the ground. She's not showing any sort of movement, so they think that she's already dead. In his past life, these 2 goons even took the dead body of his sister with them. Meanwhile, in the real time, both goons start bickering to sell Tiny's sister's body for organ harvesting. Tiny tries to stop them, but he cannot move his body nor give out a noise. Tiny still didn't give up, and he starts moving his body with all of his strength. His body starts moving and he can feel mana flowing through it. He jumps toward the goon who is trying to take away his sister's body. He bashes his head with the goon and he gets smashed against the wall. Both goons become enraged at Tiny for fighting back. One of the goons who just got pushed back bursts with anger and he tells his friend to kill Tiny. Both of them start beating Tiny with punches and kicks. After some time, they both get bored and start leaving. Tiny is confused to know that he can manipulate mana at this age. He thinks maybe the Sword Emperor really sent him back to the past. He has now a glimpse of hope for changing his future. But he starts crying because if the Sword Emperor had sent him a few more hours into the past, he could have saved his sister's life. He thinks that he should at least use this chance to let his sister rest in peace. He also remembers that the Sword Emperor told him to find him when he returned, but the Sword Emperor have to wait because he first needs to take care of some trashes who have death coming for them. He takes his sister to a church for her final rites. We also came to know that Tiny and his sister were not connected by blood. They both had black-colored eyes and black hair, which was pretty rare in the whole continent. His sister found him and she named him Tiny. She always treated him with love and care. At the same time, the priest chants some prayers for the depraved Irina. A red-haired friend of Irina is present there. Her name is Emma, and she thinks Tiny has changed a bit after his sister's death. Back in time, when she went to check up on Irina, Tiny was eating food right next to her body, and his cuts were all healed after finishing the food. After eating, he took his sister's body and started leaving, but Emma tried to stop him because he was also injured. But Tiny brushed her away, saying he's alright. Tiny left after thanking her for the food, and he said he will return her favor one day. Tiny is motivated to not let Irina's death hold him back, and his sister always told him to be confident and keep his head high. He tells his sister to watch him from the sky as he will not leave any regrets this time. After a whole month, Tiny is standing in front of a rock manor and he is glowing with mana. He gives off a confident smile and he seems ready for something. He starts heading toward the manor and there are 2 guards on standby who know him as a beggar from the slums. Tiny angrily inquires about the wolf from the thugs. One of them gets pissed and he asks Tiny how he dared to call their leader's name. The thug gets in position to teach Tiny a lesson with a slap, but Tiny gets a hold of his hand. Tiny grabs the wrist of the thug with his force and the thug starts screaming in pain and agony. After watching the condition of the first thug, the second thug starts sweating in fear. The second thug musters up his strength to grab and throw Tiny, but he cannot move him for some reason. The second thug is wondering why he is so heavy, and Tiny asks him why is he not lifting him up. Tiny tells him to give up, and he kicks the second thug. Tiny is quite happy because his mana body has taken up its place. He wasn't able to pull it off in his previous life. By fusing a mana body with a physical body, one can become more powerful as a result of the interactions between the 2 bodies. This is the secret technique Tiny has developed. This technique is quite powerful, but it required a lot of food to sustain, and Emma has been helping Tiny with his food problem. The thug, who was just pushed back, starts running for his life, and Tiny's coming after him. Tiny grabs the thug with his bare hands, and he pulls him up in the air. Then he throws him toward the main door of the manor. The thug bursts through the door and there are more thugs present inside. Tiny comes inside and he's giving off a smile. The thugs gather around him and 2 more red-haired thugs are looking at him from above. They both start glaring at him with their red eyes. Tiny grabs the leg of a bald thug and he starts spinning him around as a weapon. Tiny is using the bald thug as a weapon to get rid of the bandits blocking his path. After taking care of the lower level thugs, Tiny informs the red-haired Rander brother that now it's their turn to get wrecked. One of the Rander brothers is about to pull out his sword, and Tiny tells them both to come down at once. One of the brothers realizes that Tiny is a mana user. Both of them start laughing happily because the bodies of mana users are sold at high prices. They both jump up to attack Tiny, but Tiny throws away the bald thug he was using as a weapon because the bald thug is broken. He remembers that in his previous life he was talked down by an old knight for using humans as weapons in battle. The old knight thought his ways of battle were too primitive, so he taught him hand-to-hand combat. Both Rander brothers attack him with their swords, but Tiny manages to dodge them by leaping back. Tiny counters their attack by punching one of the Rander brothers. The second brother is amazed by Tiny's speed, but he gets kicked in the face before he can attack Tiny. Tiny jumps up toward the second brother he just kicked. He grabs the second Rander brother up in the air and he throws him with his full force. Before the first Rander brother can hit the floor, Tiny comes up to him and he kicks him with his leg. The first Rander brother drops inside a room with their boss. This person is called Wolf, and he's the ruler of the bandits. The Wolf is wondering why there is so much commotion outside. In his previous life, Tiny was quite surprised to find out that Wolf was a pimp in a remote area belonged to the Beastman tribe, which was considered best among the demi-human races. Even among the Beastmen, the pure silver werewolves were considered special. since they had a trait which manifested in direct lineages of the were-beast royal families, and Tiny barely managed to kill him in his previous life. Tiny is determined to find out why a royal beastman is in such a remote place. Tiny comes in and Wolf asks him if he's responsible for all the commotion out there. Tiny tells him that there is no need to know that because Wolf is soon going to bite the dust. Wolf becomes enraged and he's going to rip Tiny's mouth apart. Wolf starts transforming and Tiny tells Wolf that it is good for him to go on all out from the start. Wolf finally finishes his transformation, but Tiny feels that something is missing. In his previous life, Wolf had silver fur, but now his fur is red. The wolf starts charging at him. Wolf attacks Tiny, but Tiny dodges it by leaping back. Wolf attacks him for the second time and Tiny dodges it by leaping to a side. Tiny is a bit disappointed because Wolf is much weaker than his previous life. Tiny grabs Wolf's mouth with his hand and his hand starts pulsating with mana. The wolf is in pain and his mouth starts bleeding. In his previous life, one of Tiny's friend was a beastman, and he told him the secrets to take care of a beastman in a berserk state. Wolf starts attacking Tiny left and right, but he easily manages to dodge all of his attacks. Tiny kicks him again and Tiny says beating a dog again and again is the best treatment they can receive. Tiny starts kicking him again and again. He then kicks the beastman, throwing him up against the wall. A mana circle appears inside the cracked wall. Wolf transforms back to his human form and a red stone falls out of his mouth. After Wolf comes back to his senses, Tiny welcomes him. Wolf is quite afraid and he asks Tiny why he's doing this to him. Tiny tells him to shut up and beg his sister for forgiveness. Wolf starts begging Tiny non-stop, but Tiny keeps pummeling him. After a few minutes, the whole body of Wolf is trembling from the pain, and Tiny prays that this must have comforted his sister. Tiny is about to take his head, but Wolf starts confessing his crimes and he starts begging to Arena for forgiveness. While Wolf is begging, Tiny asks him what a beastman like him is doing in such a place, and he also notices the red gem. Tiny picks up the red stone, but he has never seen anything like it in his previous life. Tiny becomes a bit confused as the red stone starts releasing some demonic ki. A chained white wolf starts popping out of the stone. Tiny remembers a moment from his previous life where he was led to watch some spiritual creatures by his friend. Spiritual creatures are living beings reborn after accumulating mana for at least a few hundred years. Tiny heard that spiritual creatures are rare, but his friend tells him that the soul of a spiritual creature is a spirit. She then further elaborates by telling him about the embodiment of a spirit by holding a stone. Tiny thinks that this is a spirit stone, and it is similar to the one his friend told him about. Tiny asks Wolf why a werewolf like him possessed such a precious item. Plus, it's in a weird state. It is imitating a demonic key which is present in the spirit stones of demons. Tiny breaks the weird-looking demonic chains holding back the spirit. The spirit gives out a loud growl after being released from his shackles. The consciousness of Tiny gets sucked inside a memory fragment of the spirit. In the memory fragment, the silver wolf was being surrounded by red-hooded assassins. All of these assassins were releasing demonic energy. The assassins cut the four legs of the silver werewolf and it fell to the ground. One of the assassins poured some demonic ki in his dagger, and he stuck his dagger inside the skin of the silver werewolf. After some time, the red-hooded men were able to extract the spirit stone from his body. They handed over the spirit stone to a kid, and he turned into a red-looking werewolf. Tiny now knows that this wolf thug was created by those red-hooded men. He couldn't complete his full transformation because Tiny came too fast, and he couldn't completely absorb the spirit stone. The silver spirit is angry and he tries to go for Wolf Thug, but Tiny stops his advance. Tiny tells the spirit that Wolf deserves a more gruesome death. The wolf comes closer to Tiny to tell him something. When Tiny broke the chains holding back the silver wolf spirit, some of his mana flew into the cracked spirit stone to heal it. That's why they can now communicate freely. The wolf tells him that he is correct. Tiny asks him if he can make a contract with him, and the wolf moves his head up and down, pointing that it is possible. Tiny puts some mana in his hand, and he moves it toward the silver wolf spirit to make a contract with him. In his previous life, his friend Estina was one of the top 10 Night Tamers. Most spirits grow stronger with the increase in Spirit Tamer's strength, and this silver werewolf spirit can prove to be a valuable ally for him in the future. But before they can make a contract, the silver werewolf spirit has a favor. He wants Tiny to take revenge for him. Tiny tells him that it is no big deal, and he was planning to kill all the people related to the demonic key anyway. With that said, Tiny pets the werewolf spirit and he becomes small. Tiny names him Lunar Wolf because he has silver fur just like a moon. After Tiny gives him a name, their contract is completed, and Lunar Wolf gives out a loud roar. Tiny is wondering who can be behind this bandit leader. He thinks maybe he's related to the demonic worshippers. They are fanatics who worship the demon kind. In his previous life, the demon worshippers made the whole world a mess, even before the Demon King army showed up. Tiny kicks Wolf and he inquires about the person who gave him the Spirit Stone. But Wolf is out of his mind and he is still saying that he is sorry to Lady Arena. Lunar Wolf gives out a loud roar near him which brings him back to his senses. Tiny asks him again about the guy who gave him the Spirit Stone. He says they belong to the organization, and Tiny asks him about the organization. Wolf starts laughing and he informs Tiny that he is just a test subject, and the organization will not let him get away with this. All of a sudden, his head explodes from inside. Tiny realizes that they must have put an enchantment on his mouth, and he remembers that something similar happened in his past life when he defeated Wolf. Back then, Tiny thought his subordinates who were on the first floor were the organization he was talking about. But after beating his subordinates for the second time, he realized that they were clueless about this organization, and they had no idea that their leader was a werewolf in the first place. There is no use in remembering the old times, so Tiny focuses his attention on the blue magic circle in the cracked wall. Tiny throws the dead body of Wolf into the wall to make the crack bigger. After the rubble has been cleared, a locked vault is present below the magic circle. Tiny places the hand of the dead bandit leader on the circle and the vault door opens up. Tiny already knew about this vault full of treasures, and there is a golden ring among the treasures which he needed to gain the trust of the Sword Emperor. This ring is quite important, and it is called Valencia Family Ring. In his previous life, a woman with golden hair inquired about his name. Tiny was working as a beggar at that time, and he told her that his name is Tiny. The woman told him that he has a cute name, and she handed over her golden ring to him. She told Tiny to come look for her with that ring. Later, this ring was taken from Tiny by the bandits. The woman who gave him the ring was the youngest daughter of the Sword Emperor, and her name was Chloe von Valencia. She was also quite famous for her kindness, and her nickname was Valencia's Angel. There was a culture in the Valencia family that when their daughters reached the legal age of 16, they must lay flowers in each temple and make their names known. That is one of the reasons why they met at Invader, which is one of the districts of File's estate. Last time it took him a lot of time to get this ring back from the bandits, but this time this ring will be quite helpful for him. All of a sudden, a voice comes from outside inquiring about a certain person. Tiny starts smiling as he knows who this person might be. It's revealed to be another bald knight who came over to help after hearing that the subordinates of Wolf were beaten by a kid. His name is Lamb, and he is the outer castle commander of guards, and he is a corrupt man who works for the corrupt estate lord. As Tiny is coming down from the stairs, Lamb asks him if he is responsible for this mess, and Tiny replies with a yes. Tiny tells him that he came here so fast so that he means he must be taking bribes from the wolf. Lamb becomes enraged and he leaps forward toward Tiny to attack him with mana. Tiny easily brushes off his mana attack. While Lamb is trying to attack him again, the kick of Tiny moves toward him. Tiny kicks him with full force, but his attack has been blocked by Lamb. Tiny intentionally used some of his strength because he don't want to make the estate lord his enemy yet. Lamb throws him back. Tiny cannot mess with him for real because the number of troops he commands is too many. Lamb is about to get his sword out to attack Tiny, but he realizes a spirit wolf standing behind Tiny. Tiny tells him that he can resolve this issue by paying him instead of Wolf. Lamb tells him that he can think about it if Tiny can pay him 5 white gold coins that Wolf used to pay him. But Tiny is not buying any of his smelly crap, because he knew Wolf used to pay Lamb only 1 white gold coin. Lamb becomes angry after hearing the answer of Tiny. The Lunar Wolf gives a cold stare to Lamb. Tiny tells him that he can't just simply take care of him right now if he disagrees with his offer. Lamb unsheathes his sword as he knows he cannot win against Tiny. Tiny asks him about his answer and Lamb tells him to pay him before the last day of the month. Some of the thugs ask Lamb why he's leaving like this, and Lamb punches one of the thugs. Tiny throws a coin toward Lamb and he catches it. Tiny asks him to arrange a meeting for him, because he's the new owner of this manor, and he wants to greet the estate lord. Lamb tells him that he will report it back to the estate lord, and the estate lord can get angry if Tiny can't pay on time. Tiny tells him to not worry about it, and Lamb heads outside. Tiny is giving off an evil smile as he is up to something fishy. The thugs try to leave after Lamb, but Tiny stops them. Tiny informs them that they have an hour to gather all the women who work at the red light district and all the children who beg an invader. If they are late by just a minute, Tiny will start killing off all the thugs one by one. In case they try to run away, his spirit will chase them and rip them apart. The thugs start running as they have only 1 hour to complete the task. If everything goes according to the plan of Tiny, it won't even take a week for him to take care of this place. The thugs come back after an hour with all of the women and kids. Emma runs toward Tiny and she's worried about his hand, which has a lot of blood on it. Tiny tells her to not worry about it because it's not his blood, and the wolf is already dead and his body is in front of them. Emma confirms that it is really the body of Wolf, and everyone becomes shocked. The women and children become afraid as they all know the estate lord was behind Wolf. One of the girls asks what will happen to them, as the estate lord can punish them for challenging the nobility. Tiny pulls up a diary, and he tells them that the estate lord is the one who should be worried about challenging the nobility, because he is the one making a fool out of Duke Valencia.